So hi there, this is the content marketing webinar, an introduction to content marketing, and I'm Neil Wilkins. As we go through this session, I'll be looking to do a Q&A at the end of the webinar if you have any topics or questions or things that either I didn't explain well enough for you, or that you'd like a little bit more clarification on, or if you just have any observations or anything that you'd like to share. We're going to be using the chat facility for that, so feel free to add any contributions or questions or just observations as you go. I'm not going to be tracking it as we go through the session itself, which is being recorded, as I've mentioned before, but I will review those at the end in the Q&A, so feel free to add anything to those. You can find the chat facility in the little control panel that should be on your screen right now. So content marketing is a really interesting subject. It's one of those subjects that we really need to get our head around as marketers. There is no question that as a marketer, you are constantly faced with creating reactions in people. You're constantly faced with hopefully influencing people's behaviors. You're constantly facing the challenge of influencing your peers, your line manager, and basically all the stakeholders in and around your organization. So what we need to really do, as well as customers, and this is using customer in its broadest sense, is we need to understand what it is that we have in our armory, our sort of toolkit of things that we can use, and also, really importantly, what is appropriate to get this emotional reaction from the people that we're trying to influence, communicate to, market to, or provide customer service or customer support with. So it is quite, on the one hand, quite a simple exercise, but on the other hand, it's really, really super complex. So what we're going to explore here, and this is very much an introduction to it, we can go into a lot more detail in future sessions in particular areas, and one of those areas is paid sort of advertising and paid content. So we're only going to kind of touch on that one in this session, but a future session that's been requested is to look in a lot more detail to the whole subject of sort of paid content, because that is almost an art form and a science in itself. But in this session, what we're going to cover and look at are some very basic principles and some building blocks that will allow you to become very, very efficient in the content that you're creating, and hopefully in the very, very near future create some super, super value for the people that you're trying to influence and communicate with. Now, the first starting point, and this was covered in one of the previous webinars that we did, which was customer persona, is that we need to really prioritize who it is we're talking to. The days are long, long gone where we could just think about messages that we had and just broadcast. I mean, we no longer broadcast. Anybody who is in marketing who is broadcasting, and the word gives you the clue, you're casting your message wide and very broad, and that is kind of where the word came from. Broadcast came from the old sort of television and radio days where, you put a message out there over the airwaves and you hoped that the person you were trying to influence was out there somewhere and would be listening. Now, obviously, we're getting far, far more sophisticated, far, far more targeted in the current marketing ecosphere, because what we have is the opportunity to really clearly define who we're targeting, learn how to find them, obviously through a lot of the time digital means, and a lot of the stuff we're talking about in this session is regarding digital, and then listen to them. So actually kind of figure out what it is that's pressing their buttons, what it is that's their challenge that maybe we can support them with, what it is that they're facing as a bit of a problem that we can solve, and just really providing some really excellent value to them in terms of a marketing or customer experience. So it all starts with that persona. In previous sessions, we've explored three personas, and we had Mr. and Mrs. Parker, who are very, very different to a persona that we might call Ben, for example. Now, even just seeing those three people, those three individuals, you can see instantly, and I mean, this is not rocket science, this is really common sense, but so many marketers forget this, that you can see that there are fundamental differences between these people. They are basically different ages, they're very different demographics. You can see what they're doing is very different. So their lifestyles, their interests, their probably work or leisure is going to be, massively, massively different. So if our starting point with our content is that we just begin to communicate what it is we do, we are clearly missing a trick, because these people are going to translate what we send out in a very, very different way. And again, as I say, a lot of people are using this kind of information to really start to build some, really, really focused and targeted communication and marketing messages. The other thing that we did as well is we thought in quite some detail about the journey that we would be taking these individuals or these customer personas on. So we spent quite a bit of time in the previous webinar looking at the concept of journey. So building awareness with this targeted person that we're after, converting them, in other words, actually, changing their behavior or getting them to physically do something, press a button, commit their credit card details, sign a contract, change their behavior, whatever it is that you define as a conversion point, so that you can see that they've moved from just being aware to being an actual signed up, fully fledged, engaged customer. So that's the conversion point. And of course, our content needs to flow through these various stages, and particularly into that retention phase. And one of the things that we talked about in the previous session a little bit was this whole thing about when you've actually got a customer in the palm of your hand, it is, as a marketer, really, really important to think about how you're going to retain their attention, how you're going to retain their commitment. Because one of the big things that happens at that retention phase, if you get it right, and you keep this existing customer very, very happy, very engaged, very motivated, very kind of, on their radar, then you stand a chance of two things. One is that you start to open up the opportunity that when they need your kind of service or product again, they're going to come back to you. Okay, so that you are still front of mind. But really importantly, and probably even more important than that, what you do is you keep the opportunity for them to become advocates. Now, advocacy is the number one currency in marketing right now, this word advocacy. The reason it's so important is because if you get advocacy, in other words, people actually sharing what it is you do, so they press the share button. It's more than just the like or the love button on Facebook. It is very much about the sharing button. So that is kind of what we're talking about in a digital sense. In a real world sort of physical sense, what we're talking about is word of mouth. So this customer who you've kept really happy with great content, serving them on an ongoing drip-fed basis, they then start to advocate. They start to talk about you and what you do, the value you're adding, the great outcomes you're giving, and we'll come on to outcomes a bit more in a moment. And what they do is that is advocacy. What they do is they share and market on your behalf. And so marketers who are doing this customer journey thing, fueling customer journeys with really targeted attention on these personas that they're focused in on, if they're doing that, they stand a chance of getting advocacy. And of course, when we talk about, scaling, going viral and all of that kind of stuff, sort of viral campaigns, for example, are very much about advocacy, because it's about people saying, hey, I like that, or, I really commit to that, or, hey, that's really great, that's providing great value. Okay, I'm going to share. So the whole concept of going viral, and obviously, we've seen many, many viral campaigns over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. That whole concept is driven by very targeted, very focused content. So it's nothing new. This is not something that we've sort of not been aware of, but it's something that as marketers we have to be mindful every single morning when we wake up. It's about the value that we're trying to create and the value that we're adding through targeted content for our customer persona that goes through their journey that we've plotted out. So hopefully you can kind of see how these things are starting to build. But what I want to cover really in more detail in this session is actually the concept of the content itself. So here we are with some ideas for you to play with. Now, obviously, as we're recording this session, and if you're watching this on catch up or on demand after the live session, then obviously you can press pause and sort of take notes. So be aware, obviously, if you're watching this live with me right now, that you will be able to sort of watch this again. So if I go a little bit too quickly through this and you haven't taken all the notes, it obviously is available to you. These are some of the principles as to how to begin to create great content online. So the very, very first thing, and this really applies to every single account that you have, and in lots of ways this would apply to sort of physical, traditional offline marketing content as well, is that the principle of having some kind of biography, some kind of call to action, some kind of very, very simple way of people identifying, it's you. Okay, I know how to get to you. Making all of the content really punchy and really short, really focused. I mean, one of the things that's so clear now with this evolution of access to digital content, particularly going down to small smartphone screens to being on things like Apple Watch and very, very small screen and devices, is that we don't have the luxury anymore of long form content. So what we need to make sure is that any content that we produce is short, punchy, and really to the point. And of course, that's where the whole evolution towards sort of images and video, and we'll talk a little bit about audio sort of towards the end of this session. But that's why, or one of the key reasons why these forms of media have evolved, because the attention span of your customer is now so short. The ability for them to read content is now so tight, or predicated rather on the size of the screen that they're actually consuming your content through. So it's vital that you think in short form, think about very, very punchy. If you do have a lot to say, so maybe if your product is quite technical, or if it needs a more lengthy description, then providing further links so that people can kind of drill down, maybe download a PDF of a data sheet, or maybe go onto some kind of long form content deeper into your site or into your social media, or maybe to have a sort of a one-to-one conversation face to face, they need to literally pick up the phone and actually order an appointment. So there are different ways that you can obviously take people again deeper into the journey if long form content is something that's important to you. But for most of us, taking people through an engaging customer journey of that awareness, conversion, and then keeping them retained, it is about short, sharp, and punchy. It's about drip feeding content into that customer journey to keep people moving to the next step of that journey. So why are they going to do that? Why are they going to, even if you're starting to produce this short content, why are they going to engage with you as opposed to the company or the organization down the street who basically is doing pretty much the same thing? And certainly if you're in a commercial environment, you will obviously have competition. If you're in a charity, for example, you'll have, certainly competition in terms of awareness, because, people only have a certain amount of money that they're willing to give to charity. So, you have competition as well. If you're in a government organisation, a council, or a non-profit, it's all about behaviour. But of course, that then is predicated on time. So have you got the attention and the time of those people that you're trying to communicate with? So the only way that really you can do that is if you have what we call the unique sales proposition. So in essence, you have a unique story and a unique kind of strapline, as it were, a short sentence that really typifies and brings together in a really short, punchy little summary why it is that you're unique and the value that you're going to bring to them is in itself unique. So, you are super valuable to them. Now, without that USP, the unique sales proposition, you are just a Me Too brand or a Me Too service or a Me Too product. And the danger that you face is because none of us have got enough time in the day. Everybody's busy. None of us have empty inboxes. None of us have a small social media timeline. There is so much noise going on out there. So unless you have a very clear USP so that people identify, it's you, and right, I understand what it is and what value you're going to bring me. Unless they can get that within seconds, and it really is within seconds, you're very likely to have lost them. So think about the attention span. Think about that time that you have available or that you don't have available, because that's absolutely crucial in terms of their attention. Then the really clever stuff starts because, back in the old days when I kind of first began in marketing, so we're talking a long, long time ago, it was all about features and benefits. So you had a feature of a product or a feature of a service, and then you described it, and then you said, okay, and here's the benefit of that particular feature, or this kind of set of features. One of the things that was always sort of talked about was things like remote controls on televisions. You'd have 100 buttons on your remote control, and they gave you all these lovely benefits, and actually we only ever used one or two. The scenario, and of course then all the television manufacturers said, well, look at my remote control, mine's even bigger than yours, look, we've got 120 buttons on here, so that must give loads more benefit. And so basically all marketing did was kind of ratchet up the number and said, well, actually, biggest is best, more is actually better for you because it gives you more benefits. And actually what the customer and the consumer was sat there thinking was, well, actually, no. Actually, all you're doing is you're confusing me. You're making this remote control harder for me to use. And actually what's going on here is actually I'm losing interest in you, but I'm also losing faith that you really get what I use this thing for. So when we talk about kind of listening to the customer through content and listening to how they react, it's really important that what we focus on is what's in it for them. So not what's in it for us. In other words, we can beat you for the number of features that our product has, and hey, aren't we clever because we've got more than the competitor down the road. Actually what we say is, look, we've got the stuff that's going to give you a great outcome. So don't worry about how many features or what benefits those features bring. What we're in it for is actually to explain that your world will be better if you engage with us. So in other words, what's probably in it for you? So I love this word outcome because it means how's my life going to be different if I engage with the content that you're producing, if I actually engage with you as a brand, if I understand your USP, if I see that the content is short and punchy and really to the point, and it actually tells me a story that is in it for me. So I know where I'm going to benefit from this as a customer. Then your customer is going to be listening. Then you've got their attention. And then what we do is we start to think about what we might call storytelling. Now, one of the key things with storytelling is that what typically happens then is that the marketers got their attention because they've got the USP, they've started to do some really good stuff, they're short and punchy, and they think, hey, I'm doing really, really well here. And then they dip themselves back into then talking about, well, look, and I've got this lovely product. And oh, by the way, I know I've done really good marketing to this point, but actually, I'd really like to sell you this product or service. Would you like to buy it? Now, of course, what happens then is the customer thinks, okay, I can see what you've done there. So you've glossed all this thing up. You've kind of put a lovely veneer on the top of this content, but actually all you really want to do is sell me some stuff. And actually all you really want to do is influence my behavior. Well, I'm sorry, no. And this is what happens typically is that what we find is if we just follow these principles without actually telling real stories, then the customer will see through it. Because the customer knows that this is going to be driven by marketing. They know that marketing is getting savvier and savvier and has more and more data at their disposal and listens to loads of the insights and kind of watches our behavior, almost kind of Big Brother-esque. And so they know that. So what they're looking out for is organizations who they can feel that they can trust and really resonate with. So even if you do those things about, short, punchy biographies and, really sort of, very clear messages, USPs, focused on the outcome, it's still about storytelling. So I always sort of set the challenge when I'm talking with my clients for, look, could you tell a story without using your products and services? In other words, take your products and services out of the mix for a minute. Why would your customers still be interested in you as an organization if you didn't have any products or services to sell? Because if you can get it to that point, then you're talking about real relationships, okay? Because what we're trying to do here is build this, what we call customer lifetime value, CLV. It's a marketing phrase, bit of jargon, but it really kind of reminds us that it's really, really important to think of this as a lifetime value. So when we produce content, we're not just doing it as a means to an end. What we're doing it is to hopefully get into a dialogue, a two-way flow of conversation and information that allows us to kind of listen and learn interact with the target customer, and then kind of adapt our behavior much as we would in a real world scenario. So if you're talking to somebody and you think, I want to get, into this relationship with you, so I need to listen to you to kind of figure out what it is that, you want and what value I'm going to get from you, and vice versa. And we can do that by storytelling. So giving examples of what it's like in our organization. So some of our content is about getting to know us. Some of our content can be, testimonials, and can be, great case studies of, how we've worked with this company or this organization over here, or, what this particular consumer thought, and, their lifestyle, and how it kind of interacted with our product and service, and kind of, how we added value to them. So storytelling is a huge thing. And what that does, it allows us then to start to think about, the other sort of touch points that our consumers have. And I always like this word community, because, often when we start to think about really drilling down into our customer personas and kind of really figuring out, if we did a sort of a deep dive profile of them, what we'd be probably looking to do here would be kind of really understand them at a granular level, much as we did in that persona webinar exercise. And one of the things that we can often lose sight of is the fact that they exist in communities. So they don't just exist in isolation. And one of the dangers that we face if we start to do the persona exercise is that we start to kind of drill down and almost forget that actually they exist in this more holistic sense. So what we need to do when we're thinking about their content is think about, well, okay, so where is their community? What kind of things as well? If we're thinking about our storytelling, if we're thinking about the outcomes, it's got to be done in the context of the world in which they live. So what kind of communities are they in? So professionally, what kind of communities do they reside in? So it could be a workplace, it could be a professional group or association that relates to their profession. From a personal or leisure perspective, there could be specific special interests that they have. They might have specific hobbies. They could have a whole bunch of stuff going on in their kind of personal sort of social lives. So what kind of communities do they live in? Because what we need to make sure is, again, not that we're kind of sort of trying to whitewash this and sort of appear like, hey, I'm your friend, because obviously it's a professional relationship. So we're talking professional intimacy, not personal intimacy here. But we need to be mindful and put into the context the world in which they actually exist. And something else which is becoming ever more important as well is to really understand who their influencers are. Now, influencers can come at a very local level. So that can be influencers in their family group, for example. It can be influencers in their sort of friendship group, their work colleagues. Who is it that's influencing them? Because if we can understand that, we can almost sort of get into the heads of these people and kind of really understand, well, what is it that motivates them? What is it that they like? What is it, what kind of other products and services do they consume? And why do they consume those products and services? And is there anything that we can do, not necessarily to play copycat and actually do it in the same way, so much as, kind of we would be talking about celebrity influencers or fashion influencers, and the like. We're not really talking about that. What we're talking about is, influential people in our target customer personas world, that if we can understand how and why they're influenced by these people, then maybe we might want to just fine-tune and adapt the kinds of content that we produce and our tone of voice and our style accordingly, so that we become ever more relevant. So if you remember back in previous sessions, we talked about these three things that we're trying to be positioned as in front of our customer, which is current, relevant, and informed. So if we look like we're current, so we're up to date with the kind of stories that we're telling. If we're relevant, so we understand their community, we understand their world, we understand their pain points, and how we can sort of help to solve them with great outcomes. And we're also informed. In other words, we're providing them with added value. We're providing them with stuff that, maybe other people aren't providing. So it is very much a holistic way of joining up our sort of view of content and the kinds of things that we talk about. So it's storytelling, it's thinking about their community and their sort of influencers and the groups of people who influence them. It's about understanding the unique value that we add, and doing those things before we even start to plot out, okay, fundamentally, what are we going to then say? Because, okay, Neil, I might agree with you with all the things you've said, but I still don't understand the kind of content that we could put out there. But by doing that, what we allow ourselves then to do is to start to make the choices when we get to the level of detail, which we're going to cover now, which is, okay, so what's my content going to look like? Because to this point, what we've really talked about is some of the fundamental considerations that you need to sort of be thinking about to make sure that you are aligned with your customer, that you're aligned with the sort of the outcomes that they desire. You're aligned with the relevance of the products and services that you have, and that you're certainly aligned with the current sort of tone of voice and style of communication right now. So now we've got to that point. So we build the sort of the baseline, as it were, of thinking. So these are our kind of philosophies. So now we can get into, okay, so what are the different types of content and how are those going to actually manifest in our business? So there are three different types of content. We've got paid, owned, and earned. And what I'll do is I'll explain sort of very briefly what these three are and the kind of value that they add. And the reason for saying the word value is because the value is very different. Okay, so paid content is content that you have, guess what, paid for. So in other words, this is kind of advertising content, or for example, in digital, you might call this, say, boosted posts. So boosted content is paid content. Okay, now I think for most of us, we can spot a mile off when we're looking on our computers or smartphones. We can spot sponsored links, we can spot AdWords campaigns, we can spot boosted posts. We can just spot very, very quickly paid content. The value that brings is far, far less than owned content. Okay, so by owned content, this is the content that you've produced as a result of thinking about all the things that we've covered so far. So owned content is content that will probably most likely exist on your website. It'll probably most likely exist in kind of printed matter that you hold and that you've produced. It will certainly be in your social media, actually within your accounts, but this is stuff that you own. This is content that you've created. So you've created this content from all of the stuff that's gone before. So you've understood your customer persona, you've figured out, the kinds of messages that will resonate with them, and you've got this content out there. So you put it out there. So that's owned content. Now, the value of owned content over and above paid content is greater, because people know with paid content, you've just bought that. So you've just spent money to get into that position. Owned content going forward is going to become ever more valuable to be seen in front of your customers' eyes, based on all of the different algorithms that both Google, other search engines are available, and social networks are providing, because they are creating algorithms that are now presenting content based on the value to the reader, the value to the receiver. So if people in the not too distant future are seeing your content that you've just produced organically, so it's not paid for, you've just produced it, and it's good, relevant content, so it's current, relevant, and informed, those things that we've talked about, then the algorithms of digital platforms like social networks and the top search engines, they will be presenting that content first. So owned content is highly, highly valuable, and just by the nature of the word owned, it means that you own it. So you can edit it, you can change it, you can adapt it, you can add to it in the future. And that'll be something that we'll cover in a future session. But the biggest value comes from earned content, okay? So earned content, this is the stuff that's kind of on the advocacy treadmill, because once you produce some owned content, if it's good enough, you're going to get that content shared, and that goes in straight into the pot of earned content. You've earned the profile of that content going wider and broader and deeper into the social networks that you've published it in. Earned content is also when somebody provides a review of something. So they might provide you with a little unprompted sort of testimonial, or a Google review or a Facebook review, something like that. So that's earned content. So you've earned that content that's come from a third party, but it's based on the value that you've given them. So obviously you can see the value of that is higher. So all of the time when you're thinking about your content, the real trick to getting this right is for you to be thinking all of the time, is this content shareable? Is this content adding value? Have I included my USP somewhere in there? Have I talked about outcomes? All those things that we talked about before, but inherently, is this content shareable? Because if it is shareable and it could be advocated, then you've moved into that high level earned content sort of layer, if you like, of the content marketing strategy. So it's really important to keep that in mind, because the more you can sort of trigger that off, the better for your sort of marketing results. Now, of course, when we look at the whole concept of viral, and we talked briefly about viral sort of a few moments ago, that is all happening there in the earned phase. So that is obviously highly valuable, where this stuff just goes then out at scale and finds a whole range of distribution channels and a life of its own. So that's why earned is so important. So you might not go viral with a capital V, but any kind of advocated content is going to be hugely valuable to you. So I would certainly encourage that you sort of consider that as you go. So that's all fine, but how do you actually create exceptional digital marketing content? Now, I always sort of focus in on this word exceptional, because I think for me, it's just really, really important. Digital marketing content is just digital marketing content. Anybody can create it. Good or even great digital marketing content, your competitors are also doing. But if you bring together all of the things that we've talked about here, so really, really focused attention on the person, almost to the point of obsession on the person you're trying to target, making it inherently shareable, the kind of content that you produce, getting that emotional reaction for them and making it super clear the outcome that they're going to get from engaging with you, then you're starting on this road to creating exceptional content. And there is a very, very simple process for doing this. Okay, so in the real world, taking all of these concepts into play, there's a very, very simple rule that I'd like to share with you. You've got a little QR code there. So if you want this book, just scan the QR code with your phone, and it's there on Amazon for you to purchase if you should wish. Shameless plug from Neil there, but I'm very proud of this one. This is one of my sort of better days, I should say, when it comes to marketing. So yeah, this rule of thirds is something which I would challenge you to break. If this doesn't work for you, and I always say this to whoever I'm talking to, if this doesn't work for you, please, please, please let me know, because I've literally shared the rule of thirds now with, literally thousands of people through conferences and events and blogging, etc. It's been kind of shared significantly. And I'm still yet to have somebody come back to me and say, do you know, in our industry, in our scenario, it didn't work. So I will almost guarantee, I said almost, I hope you heard that bit, almost guarantee that this will actually work for you. So what is the rule of thirds? Well, it's really, really quite simple. This is the balance of content that applies all of those things that we've talked about to the way that you create your content. Okay, so 1/3's about you, personal, 1/3's free stuff, pointing, and 1/3 is selling, promotion. Okay, so let's look at those three things in a little bit more detail. So the 1/3 about you, that's basically 1/3 of your content that you put out there in social, on websites, in newsletters, wherever you sort of publish your content. 1/3 of what you do should be personal, so getting to know you. So that's either you personally, that could be you as a team, it could be you as a brand, you as an organization, or maybe there's somebody in your organization who is the face of the organization. So you've got to figure out what's relevant for you and your situation and your customers. But it's about getting to know you. Okay, so organizations who just talk about that are super boring, and so you wouldn't engage with them. But organizations who don't share any of that are these kind of hollow, faceless organizations, and do you want to buy from them? Of course you don't. So 1/3 of what you talk about should be personal. 1/3 is also then what we call free stuff. And this is the really interesting one. And this is actually the deal maker in the rule of thirds, because without this, you could become predictable. So if you just do the personal third and the promote third, actually 50-50, so half personal, half promote, and forget this point third, you become predictable, because people know you're going to talk about yourself. They also know you're going to try and sell them some product or service or get them to do something. And so you become predictable and people switch off. So the trick here is to do 1/3 of all the content that you provide is signposting or pointing to what I would call free stuff. So this is third-party content. So it could be an article, it could be a video, it could be a blog, could be news story, could be a product review, it could be something that is going to resonate with your customer persona. So if you think it's relevant for them, go away and test some stuff, but this mustn't be about you. So don't kind of shroud this pointing out to something else, sort of like putting a cloak over something that's actually yours. This has got to be genuine third-party content. So as an example, for example, if we think back to the start of the webinar where we saw Mr. and Mrs. Parker, for example. So maybe if I'm maybe it's an attraction that Mr. and Mrs. Parker would want to go and visit on a sort of Wednesday afternoon or something like that. So the free stuff could be, well, hey, look, I'm this, so the 1/3 getting to know us, well, it's the people behind the attraction. So it's people and their jobs and their roles and what they do and stuff. So getting to know the organisation. But the third free stuff, which actually means that Mr. and Mrs. Parker will probably bookmark the account or bookmark the site or follow the social media account, will be because there's added value content in there beyond just the boundary gates of this particular attraction. So it could be signposting to a really nice restaurant just down the road who are doing a special this week. It could also be signposting to the local weather channel, for example, so that when they go to the attraction, they can get, sort of download the weather details before they arrive. Any kind of sort of added value that sits around the organization's experience that they're going to be giving to the customer could be relevant. And this is one of the reasons why I've talked sort of at quite some length many, many times about the idea of having an in-depth knowledge of your persona to the level of understanding, what their sort of personal outside of work interests are. So, what kind of sport do they do? Where do they shop? What kind of, social stuff do they do? Because these are the things that you can potentially point them to. So, for example, if they always go on city breaks, again, Mr. and Mrs. Parker, for example, might always go on city breaks. So if you're sharing content that maybe helps them to understand new destinations that they might be able to discover, etc., etc. So you've got to figure out what's relevant to your persona. But that 1/3 of pointing to free stuff is a really interesting little exercise to build that professional intimacy with your customer. But also it makes you unpredictable because they're never quite sure what's coming next. And then the final third, obviously, is the overt sell. And people who say, you can't sell on social media, it should all be about relationships. You can if you do the previous 2/3. And it just works. So just test this out. Just have a little play. As a simple rule, if you look back over your Twitter account over the last, if you've got a Twitter account, over the last, say, 30 tweets that you've done, roughly 1/3 should be getting to know you, so 10 of them. Roughly 10 of them should be sort of signposting or pointing to sort of other stuff. And roughly 1/3 should be, evangelizing the products and services that you have. So that's the kind of balance. We're not talking about trying to get all three into one individual post or status update. But if you were doing an email newsletter, for example, it might be nice to kind of balance it out in that way. And certainly personally, when I've experimented with this, sort of for my own businesses, but also with clients, that in a newsletter or email sense is often a very nice way to get engagement. And having done quite a bit of A/B testing with so a little bit of research behind some sort of newsletters that I've done with clients quite recently, the ones that have this balance just seem to, get far, far fewer unsubscribes and a lot more click-throughs to the content than those that are literally about one subject or that don't actually include things like the free stuff, because it just feels too salesy. It just feels, you're only telling me about yourself because you want to sell me something. Whereas actually, if you give this added value, that free stuff, and that's why I say this is the real golden nugget in the rule of thirds, is it just gives that real kind of intimacy. It just gives that real added value. So I would strongly recommend that whatever style of content, whatever type of content that you're trying to create here, I would say practice with the rule of thirds, experiment with it, figure out what works, obviously fine-tune the bits that don't. But if you find that the balance doesn't work, please, please, please tell me. As I say, I almost guarantee that it will. But if it doesn't for you because of a certain situation, I would love to have an example I could share with you and say, in this example, it didn't really work. But I'll be very, very confident that it actually will. So then we kind of need to sort of figure out, okay, so we've got the rule of thirds, we've got all these building blocks, kind of, okay, so what is the story? What are we going to actually do here? What kind of content are we going to produce? So we've got some opportunities here to do things in different ways. So there are kind of three main ways of doing your storytelling. Okay, so the first way is you can create content. So you can sort of sit there, maybe in a darkened room with some post-it notes and think, right, I'm going to create some stories here. And you sit there and you wait, and the tumbleweed rolls past, and you think, oh, hold on, I haven't really got anything I can come up with. But then you actually start to talk to others in the organization. Maybe you look at some of the comments that you've had on some of your Facebook or Instagram or sort of LinkedIn feeds or whatever, and you start to get some ideas for the kind of content that you could create. And those could be articles, they could be short posts, they could be long blogs, could be some thought leadership stuff. So you start to pose some interesting questions. But in essence, you're creating content. Now, if you really, really struggle with creating, in other words, coming up from scratch with new content ideas, you could always begin with what we call curated content. And that is where you are looking at somebody else's article, somebody else's blog, somebody else's review, somebody else's story, and then you're curating. In other words, what you're doing is you're taking it and you're adding value to it. So you give them a shout out, maybe you take a quote from their article, and obviously you'd link back to it and be a good sort of internet citizen and give them lots of links back, lots of kudos, but then you add value to it. So in other words, particularly if there are sort of thought leadership, if there's a particular subject that you as an organization are looking to own, this could be really, really powerful, could be really useful for you. So, you can curate on a subject. So if you can't come up with some original ideas at this stage, think about, what can I do? Can I curate on this particular topic? And if that as well is a bit of a struggle, you can do something that's become really fashionable in recent years. You can just document. Now, by documenting, it's kind of a little bit like journaling, a little bit like keeping a diary. It's a little bit kind of fly on the wall, sort of documentary style. What's going on in your organization? I mean, I've had sort of people come along to sort of workshops and masterclasses where they've said, we've got this person and we want to bring this person along to this particular workshop, because what we want them to do is understand all the different types of content they can produce, because they're going to be the face of our organization. And often it can be a very surprising person. It's not the MD, it's not the chief exec, and in most cases it probably shouldn't be. It's somebody who's actually on the shop floor, somebody who's getting their hands dirty, delivering product and service. I've had people who are, they're warehouse operative because they are the person who's got the most touch points across the organization, because they're part of distribution, they're part of sales and marketing, they're part of, the management team, and, they have a really interesting story to tell. So you can document, and that is literally just showing what it's like to be on a day-to-day basis within the organization, telling stories of a new product that you're bringing to market. Now, obviously, you wouldn't do anything that's commercially sensitive. Obviously, there are boundaries on this whole documenting process, but actually people love to follow a story. They love to follow people's lifestyles. Inherently human beings are curious, to the point of nosy, and this is allowing them to kind of basically be your kind of professional stalkers, if you like, and actually kind of watch what goes on in your organization, so that they can really get to sort of understand and get a really good feel for what it is and who you are. And of course, all of this is storytelling of sorts, but you're able, if you want to do, is all three approaches, and test out which ones work well. Maybe create some original content, maybe think about curating, adding value to other people's content. Do some documenting. I mean, you can do that through a whole range of different sort of media. So it doesn't have to necessarily just be, written words and photos. You could do a podcast. You could do, a video channel, do a YouTube channel, a daily sort of live video feed into YouTube or Facebook Live on, a particular project or story of something that's going on. These kinds of things really resonate with customers. Customers love this kind of stuff, because if you're doing it and the competitor down the road isn't, it gives you a really, really great opportunity to add value and add intimacy. So explore some of these ideas, see what you think, see what might work well. And I did mention this word podcast. This is something which is I think, I've made this sort of quite clear to many people that I've spoken to over the last sort of year or two. I'm seeing this coming through from so many different sources. Lots of the big media commentators, lots of the sort of digital gurus around the world are all consistently saying that voice is going to be the biggest growth thing from 2020 for the next few years. It's powered by voice-enabled devices. I mean, a lot of us have got now, sort of voice-enabled devices in the car. So again, listening to podcasts through voice enablement is obviously very easy. We've got these devices in the home, Alexa and the like. You've got, if you've got an Apple product, you've got Siri all over your, in fact, I shouldn't say that because that'll probably trigger it off on all my devices sat here on my desk right now. But we've got all these voice-activated devices, so we can actually access voice-enabled stuff, voice-enabled content, voice-enabled storytelling, from our perspective as customers. So why not think about actually adding podcast into your mix? So it is the written word, and we've talked about how challenging that is with punchy content, but it's also video, we know that, and images. But don't forget audio. Audio is one of these things that potentially can future-proof you. And if you've got a great story, if you're documenting or if you're creating content, this is a great way of storytelling. For example, this particular webinar that you're listening to now, as it gets saved in video format so you can watch it again, it automatically saves an audio version. So there I've got a podcast of this session, which I can then use to sort of promote further sessions another time. So it's always there. So it's about, as a marketer, thinking quite creatively about, can I create content, but then use it in multiple formats and multiple ways. So if you are speaking to a customer and they're giving you a great testimonial, think about, okay, it's not just the image and the words or the video, it could actually be audio as well, because people are more and more now consuming this stuff on the go. So it's a hugely powerful opportunity for you. So to come full circle then, we've talked quite a lot about building professional intimacy. We've talked about ultimately creating advocates by thinking about these USPs, thinking about the storytelling, the creation and curation of the content that we have. We've also talked very, very much about this kind of focus on customers' outcomes. So it's not about you, it's not about me, it's all about them. It's all about them understanding, how is my life going to be different from engaging with the content that you give me? How am I going to get better value life out of this? So you've got to play back everything that you do and everything that you say in those terms. And I'd love you to go away and experiment with the rule of thirds. Remember, 1/3 personal, 1/3 point, 1/3 promote. So those are the 3 P's of the rule of thirds. And hopefully, if you do that, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have a lot of opportunity to basically test the activities and things that you do, test the kind of content that will resonate, sort of really significantly for your customer, and hopefully get an ongoing continuous improvement as you go forward, become ever more successful with your content marketing. So that's it so far. That's what I wanted to present to you. So if you want to use the chat facility on the little toolbox that you have, I've got a couple of questions come through already, so I'll answer those. But if you've got any questions at all, if you're listening to this on demand or on catch up, as they say, you can use the message thread below the link to this particular recording, and post your comments there, and I'll keep a track of it, and I will catch up with you. And hopefully answer your questions then. So this is an interesting one that we've had here. So what would I suggest as a balance between content relating to products, services and USPs, 50-50 or 70-30? I guess I'd go back to the whole idea of the rule of thirds, and I would say probably what you'd be looking to do is to wrap together all of those 3 elements kind of into the rule of thirds. So your products and services, I would probably put those 2 together, and I would say probably that those 2 together will be probably sort of most interest to, sort of looping that in with the USPs to give you a nice kind of balance on the promote side of things. I think that's probably sort of quite important. On the personal bit, I think really what you could do is you could do sort of the encountering of new products and services sort of in there as part of the personal story. The pointing bit, I think you'd need to sort of come up with something that was probably unrelated to those. But hopefully, yeah, sort of a little bit of a balance there with the rule of thirds will sort of give you that balance. But I would probably group those three things together. So product, services, and USPs. That is probably about the sort of the getting to know you bit in the rule of thirds, and then sort of beyond that into the promote. So another question come through: how would I determine if the rule of thirds has worked? Would success be monitored through sales, conversion, or could it just be an increase in followers? That's a really interesting one. I mean, it is all about kind of setting your targets early on. It's very much about setting the expectation of kind of what it is you're trying to sort of solve, and what it is you're trying to sort of achieve as your objectives. So I would certainly be setting the objectives up front. For me, when I set objectives, I'd be probably looking at a balance between subjective goals and objective. So I'd have probably on the objective goals, I'd have sort of numbers. So I literally would have numbers, and it could be conversions, could be sales. It could be, sort of very tangible things. I'd also, on the subjective side of things, I'd be looking at the quality of comments and the feedback that I have. I think I'd be looking very much to try and get some of those kind of softer, more subjective kind of measures sort of come through, because I think those are equally as important, because again, if we're looking to build this lifetime value, I think it's really sort of important that people understand it's not just about the numbers. So rule of thirds is very much about building a quality of relationship. So if there was a way you could sort of see that sort of manifesting through the quality of the comments that you're getting, and I think it is very subjective, but I think you might over time get a nice feel for that. You could lend that into also things like customer service, so things like Net Promoter Score, NPS, which you could Google and just sort of see that one. That's also quite a nice one in terms of the sort of service quality. So yeah, I think it is this balance, a balance between the two things. It's about doing the objective stuff. It is about numbers, but it's also about some of the softer things as well. So I think strike a balance there, really. Another question I've just had come through on direct message is, which would I go for, paid, owned, or earned? Well, earned comes from doing paid or owned really well. So I obviously would always want to get that, but I don't think I always would. Obviously, you can't really set out with that as a goal. For me, the difference between paid and owned, if I was wanting to do something that needed a very, very short, quick outcome, so I needed to get it almost instantly, probably paid is worth investing in. But I think what I'd be really looking for is to try and do as much owned as possible. So unless there was a real urgency, I think I'd probably build things organically using owned. Maybe I'd do a little bit of testing with paid, but it probably wouldn't be more than sort of 90% to 10%. So it'd be 90% owned, 10% paid, to just kind of test maybe new channels, new social networks and the like. But certainly if I do both of those things really, really well, then the earned will come and will follow. Another question, with paid, owned and earned, how can you encourage more earned content? I think it just comes back to that whole thing about relevance. I think as long as you are relevant, and because some people often say, well, how are you going to become more relevant? Is that because you're going to add humour in? Are you going to try and be really funny? You're going to be really entertaining? It's a tricky one. I think what you're looking to do is it's more kind of solid value, because I think if you start to bring in the likes of humour and stuff into it, it's a really subjective thing, because what one person finds funny, even if they're the same persona, what one person finds funny, another person might be really put off by. So I think you've got to be sort of tread quite carefully with things like humour. It's just a lot of value. It's just a lot of value that kind of resonates and gives great outcomes, and I think it's If anything, it's evidence-based. I think ultimately, if I just had to sum it up in one thing, it would be, yeah, if it's evidence-based, I think it really, really works. I think if it's perceived as a little bit of hot air, a little bit salesy, I don't think you're going to get much advocacy. But I think if it's very evidence-based, if people, engage with it, intellectually as well as emotionally, so they feel it in their head, makes logical sense, but actually they feel it in their heart, they really engage with it, then I think you have a chance of getting some earned content, really. But it's not easy. It really isn't easy. And I think, for a lot of organizations, they, set out, create me a viral campaign. Well, it isn't really like that. You don't really begin with a viral campaign. A campaign goes viral. So I think as long as you're providing great value, look at great outcomes, provide as much tangible evidence as you can of those outcomes, then those are the kind of triggers really that help people to share, and they particularly share, as I say, if you're getting them sort of in the head and the heart at the same time. So that's kind of what you're after. So some really good questions there. That was a bit of a flurry of people who've clearly got some stuff to go away and test and play with. So thank you to everyone who's asked those questions. Excellent questions. As I say, after the session has completed, and if you have any other sort of comments or observations or questions or any feedback on the rule of thirds particularly, then do sort of let me know in the comments below if you're watching this, as I say, on demand or on catch up. Yes, just add to the little message thread below, and we'll do our best to communicate with you. So thank you very much for coming along to the session today. Hopefully you found it useful. Go away and create some professional intimacy. Remember to listen and watch and measure the insights of every single thing that you do, because you need to be learning. As soon as you publish something, make sure that you're watching the insights. We'll do measurement and insights and analytics and stuff in another session, but for now, this has been Neil Wilkins sharing content marketing with you. Thank you very much for coming along to this particular session, and I shall see you again very, very soon.